Good morning, and thanks to everyone that's joining this breakout session for the next 20 minutes. As we said previously, based on the client base and also the people that have signed up for the conference today and the industries you're from, we decided to do this one in English instead of Spanish, since we do have some executives here from both the US as well as Asia and Europe, just strong in some of these categories. And just wanted to mention, if you're having trouble, if you want to see the presentation better, you can double click the box there. I think there's a little plus sign in the middle, so you'll be able to get the presentation larger. If you have any questions, you can send them in the chat button on the right of the sessions part. And we're going to, after this 20-minute session, we're going to have another Q&A session. I'll be together with Diego Anacini, who's our director of our telecom and enterprise hardware space, and we're going to be doing a Q&A session together, and we'll try to answer those questions together in that. And since we are talking about the future of work and the digital workplace, we're going to try something we haven't done before. Not only will it be a chat Q&A, but for the first 20 people that would like to, there's also going to be a live Q&A with video. So your video and audio will also be on. So in theory, we'll be able to have even a two-way conversation or a 20-way conversation between all of us. So hopefully you guys can all make that. So for the next 19 minutes, let me start my timer. We're going to be talking about the future of work and some of the things IDC is expecting, not only for 2021, but also into the future, and how you guys in the industry can take advantage of that. So it's important to realize that when IDC is talking about the future of work, there's the framework that we've been putting together over the last few years, but it's important to remind you all, this isn't something unique to COVID or remote work or post-pandemic. These are concepts that we've been seeing happening for years, and we've been forecasting or predicting that they'd be happening. I think the good news is that because of the pandemic and the quarantines and the remote office and whatnot, it's really accelerated some of these processes that we had already seen in place. So if we look at the future of work and what are the three main components of it, you see it's made up of three main areas, like the workforce, the actual space, and then the culture around it. Within that workforce, we're talking about a collaboration between both humans as well as technical, you could say bots or technology. In terms of the workspace, looking at places that are both, always connected, but also secure, and really doesn't matter, whether you're connecting from what time zone, or maybe from a home office, or maybe from a physical office, or maybe from an airplane, or it might not be, as well as the culture and how kind of like the human resource part has to change a bit. So if we look at, what are some of the key components within this, you could see on the technology side, in terms of the workforce, we're going to see technology helping us more and more, whether it's through, intelligent process automation, through robotic processes automation, using artificial reality or virtual reality, using AI to help. I think a lot of times when people think robotics, they think of, like C-3PO from Star Wars. Also, we have to think of also just software bots that exist in the market that have become a very common occurrence nowadays. So we're not only talking about physical robots, right? In terms of the workspace, looking at how can our facilities be smart facilities? How can the offices be secure now with the issue of the health, and distancing and space and everything, that also has a whole new component, as well as having the secure connectivity. And finally, the part of talent and the human resources part. How are we going to better take advantage of looking for talent, maybe not even in our own home country or home city, now that we have this opportunity for remote work? And we're going to talk about that a little further later. And how do you develop and retain the next generation of workers who may have different work styles than some of us older workers, for example. So among those, if we look at those kind of like four components of talent being the source of a competitive advantage, or intelligent workspaces need to be hyper agile, or this issue of empathy when it comes to the digital worker, and trust related to security. What we do see at a global level and also in Latin America is we do have kind of like things inhibiting that or kind of pushing against us, some headwinds, in terms of limits on talent and figuring out how to get the talents within the company, or inflexible work environment, or in some cases where we're talking about culture, maybe hierarchical leadership, which maybe goes up against kind of like a more egalitarian workforce that we expect in the future. And then also the issue of privacy and trust and how you come up against it. And we'll touch upon those briefly. So I think one of the most important things when we think about the future worker is remembering that at the center, at the core, we have to have that digital worker. And what does that mean nowadays? The worker has to have access to all the tools, whether physical, whether it's a laptop or a printer or a monitor or a router for the house or for the home, or for the office. But also they need to have, the software tools, the technology tools to enable them to access, any of the information that they need or any of the documents that they need, or be able to share that information wherever they are. So it's not only, the physical issue of having something, but also how does that worker communicate, and do they have access to everything that they need to do their job well? So you have, this concept of the universal device access, which is kind of almost like I'd say the easiest of the three, but then you have to build that infrastructure around them to be able to give them access to these devices, but also the information and the sharing of information. And as I mentioned previously, layering on top of that different technology tools or software tools that enable us to be more effective through artificial intelligence or machine learning or analytics, to provide all the workers and the workplaces the information that they need at the right moment. So one of the big questions we get is, how many people are returning back to work? So this is a survey that we've been doing in IDC over the last, since the pandemic, or actually even before the pandemic. And it's interesting, what you can clearly see is, as you can imagine, right now, when I say now, we could say kind of like with most companies not back to work physically yet, we saw a huge explosion in the number of people working from home. You could see it shot from about 14% up to 45%. If you add the other 16% of people working in the field, we could say, nearly 60% of the people either working from home or in the field right now. And when we ask companies, where are the workers, where will they likely be working, post-vaccine, what you can see is that we do expect that, or companies are expecting that percentage to come down. You can see it goes from 45% to 22%, but that's still significantly higher than we saw before we had this COVID-19. So what we're seeing is that, we already had this trend of more and more workers working from home. In Latin America, we didn't see it as strong as in other regions, but now that it's here, we do think that it's here to stay. It won't be at the percentages that we saw in 2020, but we do think that it will be at a higher number than we saw previously. And this obviously has a huge impact and provides opportunities for many of you in the technology space. It's important that as you guys are selling solutions, that you think about how can you take advantage of this fact that you now have a workforce that's highly fluid. In terms of the remote office, so you could have a reimagined office, which would be once you go back to the physical office, how things have changed. But you also have the remote office. This is just, different examples of technology that are needed to have an effective remote office. One of the important issues is how secure is that home office in terms of, securing the network, in terms of having single sign-on or multi-factor authentication, virtual desktop infrastructure, your web conferencing, having access to documents, as well as the policy changes that you need from an HR perspective in terms of, what work hours are people allowed to be working? After so many hours, can they be turning off you know, their laptop? Are they supposed to be expected to be looking at work after traditional hours, as well as the health and safety? And many of you last year may have seen IDC's like flatten the curve and kind of our reimagined workplace, which looked at these 5 different stages that we were and like in the economic situation. And even though this was done for COVID, I mean, it could really be done, especially in Latin America, where we have a fair amount of crisis every few years, either natural disaster or political or economic. You could kind of use a similar framework where in each of the different economic situations, it has a the business implication. Where we're seeing a lot of the companies now are a lot of the workers from our surveys are kind of like in that business resiliency phase. So we're kind of like right in the middle, kind of starting to go into that targeted investment. But when you're looking at that, you can see the different solutions out there for a reimagined workplace exist in different areas. Dynamic hoteling. What is that? About going to hotels. Nobody's traveling to hotels. No, dynamic hoteling is the concept of when you're going into an office and you have kind of like a hot cubicle, or a hot seat where, maybe the cubicle isn't assigned to one employee. So you have employees rotating in every 2 or 3 days, but using the same cubicle, hopefully after being disinfected. But having software, having the phones, either a soft phone or a physical phone there, so that when you call the phone number, it veers directly to that person's cubicle, for example. So there's tons of different software solutions out there for each of these different areas, as well as the physical hardware considerations that you need for all of this. Also, talking about that physical workplace, before we talked about kind of like, the remote workplace, we also have the reinvented office, where when most of us go back into the office, or some of you may have already started going back into the office, you're probably seeing an office that is very different than it was in 2019 in terms of, sanitation and policies related to visitors, and maybe proximity sensors, and maybe spacing between the things, and security for badging, or even the workforce allocation of when employees come in and which days. So there's an entire plethora of software solutions, I shouldn't say just software, but technology solutions for these companies that that can help with this. And when we asked, what does your organization plan to invest in over the next 12 months? It's interesting, as you can imagine, we had mentioned, or I had previously mentioned IT support, the secure access, but I know that many of you in this session come from the imaging space, from the printer category space. Let's look at workflow task automation is up there, capture software, e-signature solutions, e-form solutions. So you could see that there's a lot of categories here that maybe weren't as high on the list before, but now are showing up in our top 10 list. So lots of opportunities for traditional industries, like if we think of the printer imaging industry, where you think of it or more traditionally just as a printer, a hardware, a physical thing, now because of this reimagined workforce and workplace and the way we work, allowing those vendors, allowing those channels to get more into the overall software and document solution space. I think that's pretty good news for all of us. Now, one of those headwinds I talked about was the part of hierarchy. So some of you may remember from college the famous Hofstede study, that looks at the power distance between employees and their managers. And here you can see, when you look at the Latin American countries, you can see all of them really are in that kind of that upper right quadrant of a larger power distance. So what does that say? It means, it's going to be more challenging in Latin America of having this more fluid workforce. When having employees remote, just from looking at this chart, you could say the natural inclination of the managers in Latin America is to think, oh, my employees at work are not going to be as productive if they're working at home. Maybe there's a lack of trust because we do have this larger power distance in Latin America. And in a recent survey that IDC did in Latin America, we found that actually the single biggest challenge for digital transformation. But it's also interesting to see, previously we said, what are some of the biggest challenges? And companies were very worried about a drop in productivity. You can see the number one concern was the drop in productivity. And the good news is, when we did the same survey and said, at the end, what's happened? This is as of August. What we're seeing is higher productivity is being seen. So even though many of the companies were worried about lower productivity, we're actually seeing that having this remote workforce is helping produce higher employee productivity. So really great news. And I think one of the huge advantages we have in Latin America, so it's kind of like a puzzle here. You're probably wondering, what are all those colors for the chart on the left of the Americas? What do those colors represent? What those colors represent is language. You have English, you have French, you have Spanish, and you have Portuguese there. And we really are unique in Latin America that we are the only region in the world with so many countries speaking the same language, which that affords us huge opportunities in terms of when we're thinking of how to structure our companies and looking for that talent that we were talking about, because it gives us an opportunity to access a huge drove of talent across different countries, maybe not in our own cities or even in our own countries where we might be stationed. And on the right-hand side, you can see the large differences in salaries for IT workers. And you can see within South America, Central America, Caribbean, we have differences. Also, as you know, within each of the countries, we have differences. So this is an opportunity for companies to be able to look beyond their own home geography, but it's also an opportunity for workers who may, let's say you're a worker that lives in a small town in Honduras, who maybe was thinking, oh, in order to get a good job, I need to move to Tegucigalpa because that's where the jobs are. Maybe you don't even have to worry about that. Maybe you can now access job opportunities in Mexico or Chile or Argentina, for example. So the fact that we're enabling remote work across the region and across the world, it's an opportunity for companies, but it's also an opportunity for the employees themselves. Also, when we talk about remote work, one reason we could say is, oh, well, the pandemic, so difficult. Even beyond the pandemic, this is a list of the worst traffic in the world. And you could see that 4 of the 5 cities are in Latin America. So even post-pandemic, we still need to consider remote work and look at, how is this reimagined workplace going to benefit us in Latin America, which, looking at these statistics on traffic, I think are pretty clear. And when we look at, finally, just some of the larger technology investments for workforce parity, you can see, collaboration solutions, ways to manage the PCs, the tablets, all these different devices, video conferencing, e-signature software. These are all at the top of the company's list of priorities. So 3 questions for you all to think about as we conclude. No one company can offer all those solutions that we're saying to have a complete, reimagined workforce or a reinvented office. So it's important for you all to be looking at strategic partners. In some cases, they might even be competitors in some areas, but not others. So it's important for you all to be looking at strategic partnerships so that you can kind of build out a more complete portfolio. The other one, in Latin America, nearly all of you work through channel partners, super critical in Latin America. So, do you have the appropriate channel partners to attend to this new client base? And something that we're seeing new in the region is this concept of like home office in a box. So this is like enterprise companies, enterprise channels offering home office solutions So being able to actually set up home offices in people's homes offices where their traditional clients were enterprise based. But in order to do that, you need to have both operational and billing processes flexible enough to be able to do that. So, just some final words of thought of thinking of those things. Like to mention, many of you maybe only are aware of IDC for one little area, like maybe the trackers, or maybe you buy some of our CIS reports, or we've done specific vertical analysis for you. But just wanted to mention that we do have a very broad portfolio of products and services to help you. And with that, our time is basically up. Just want to mention thank you again. If you want to enter our Q&A session now, I'm now going to move to that where we're going to try this live Q&A as well as the chat function. So thank you once again for attending today.